Have you guys heard of this really niche Korean art house thriller called Squid Game? How do I explain this? It's kinda like if you made Fortnite in real life, but without the battle bus, and it all took place indoors. Oh, and all the players are in just crushing debt. Wait, you have heard of Squid Game? Because you've been online for the past however many months on the internet? At this point, I'm sure you're sick to death of hearing about Squid Game, but seeing as you clicked on this video, I'm sure you're still at least somewhat interested in it. It honestly is a really great show, full of interesting ideas, characters, concepts, action, and more. It's inherently really easy to digest, and I think a large part of that is because of its iconography, as in stuff like colors, shapes, sets, costume design, basically the entire aesthetic. One of its greatest strengths is that you can understand the basic premise of the show just by looking at a couple screenshots, even without so much as a synopsis. There's a ton of players that all wear the same numbered uniforms, who are all surveilled by soldiers also wearing their own separate uniforms, competing in brightly colored children's games with fatal stakes. That tonal dissonance between childlike innocence and hyper-violence lends itself to be an incredibly compelling concept, and it's become a popular trope in and of itself. There's a vast legacy of media, especially horror media, which uses children's paraphernalia like toys and games to create a spooky atmosphere. So you can see how a common story trope paired with interesting visuals and a unique gimmick led the show to skyrocket into popularity in around September of 2021. There have been countless death game narratives that have populated pop culture in the last couple decades, most notably in the 2010s with stuff like Hunger Games and The Maze Runner. It is hugely popular in gaming, with the premise lending itself really well to large tournament type games. Some of these include Minecraft Hunger Games, among the first of its kind, Danganronpa, Fortnite, PUBG, COD Warzone, and countless others. The creator himself drew heavily from Japanese and South Korean media with similar themes, including the manga-turned-movie Battle Royale, Liar Game, and Gambling Apocalypse Kaiji, which all deal with somewhat naive or disenfranchised people competing in cutthroat competitions for survival, just like in the show. But now you might be thinking, this is way too oversaturated a market to draw any new attention. But clearly, something about Squid Game, especially its visuals, are really attractive to a large, even international audience. Thus, in my eternal quest for knowledge and truth, I dove into the darkest depths of the internet to find out how and why Squid Game looks the way it does. So if it tickles your fancy, let's begin by cracking this case open and ink deeper with me into the world of Squid Game. Insert final squid pun here. Oh wait, I need to fix the script, 1 second. If you enjoy content like this, I really enjoy making video essays alongside other types of videos and a lot of music too. So if any of that interests you, please subscribe because it will make me feel very happy and good. And it's free if you want to change your mind sometime in the future, but I promise it'll be worth your while. One could consider Squid Game's narrative basis to be built on challenging essential binaries in life. These could include good versus evil, wealthy versus poor, nihilism versus hope, and many more, with the show exploring the various gray areas between them too. This is often very literally represented, most prevalently in the dichotomy between red and blue. If you've consumed other Squid Game content in the past few months, you may have come across this theory popularized by @lucy.what1 on TikTok regarding the salesman's choice of colors in the takji game. The theory states that if a person chose the red takji tile, they'd become a soldier, and if they chose the blue one, they'd become a player. And I think this theory is actually very strong. This would very effectively tie in to the red and blue dichotomy already super prevalent in the show. Referring to the frontman's desk, there's a book there with a collection of Picasso's rose and blue period works, reinforcing this central dichotomy. This is obviously visible between the guards and the players, leading us to believe that red has a more active and oppressive presence, and blue has a more passive presence. Another theory you may have come across online is about the ending beginning of the show, with Gi-yoon dyeing his hair red after winning the games. I've seen people say that this was symbolic of harnessing masculine energy, with that hairstyle being supposedly the most masculine at the salon, but I don't think that's exactly the case. Side note, I think a lot of online sources got this information from a random promotional website for a martial arts dojo, so verify your resources, kids. Otherwise, you may be the unwitting victim of advertising. But regardless, this is not exactly wrong, maybe just reductive. Red and blue imagery is already super prevalent in society, but more importantly, this could be alluding to what we commonly call yin and yang, and what is in Korean called gwa yang. It's even in the center of the Korean flag. The basic concept of yin and yang, of course, is that they are two completely opposite forces in life and nature coming together to create unity and harmony. Or yin is typically associated with blue or black, and can symbolize things like femininity, passivity, darkness, water, and more. Whereas yang or yang is typically associated with red or white and represents masculinity, hence that masculinity comment, fire, light, activeness, and more. Hence, Squid Game's visuals clearly toy with the central philosophy presented by yin and yang as two diametrically opposing forces that complete each other. I tried my best to represent Korean culture by doing a lot of research. However, if there are any Korean viewers watching that find any inaccuracies with anything I say, 죄송합니다. Please forgive me, and please comment if you have any other perspectives on this. I am not as based as my fellow South Asian Anupam Tripathi. Diving deeper into specifically Korean culture, there's a concept present called obangseg. This is a manifestation of traditional cultural philosophy present in East Asia, where the colors red, white, blue, black, and yellow, often arranged in such a pattern, represent different elements of nature. Notably, they can represent the four cardinal directions, with black being north, red being south, blue being east, white being west, and yellow being in the center. This next sentence is completely conjecture, but in my mind this seems like another way one can rationalize the world around them, similar to what the idea of what yin and yang represents. Why I bring all this up is because I believe Squid Game uses these cultural poles to symbolize different things in the show. This is the basis on which I've divided the rest of the video, using these directional and elemental meanings to examine how Squid Game plays into a specifically Korean cultural context. I will also mush this in with the common color wheel, which is often used to do visual analysis videos like this one. Is this misguided and reading too much into it? Perhaps, yet you choose to keep watching this video. Curious. I mean, above all else, this was just an effort to try and bridge the gap of what might have been lost in translation across the world. So finally, with all of this out of the way, let's dig into these 5 major color groups and see how they are significant to Squid Game. There's a lot of red present throughout the show, with each shade representing something different based on the context. In a broad sense, the many different hues and shades of red represent the direct oppression and violence the players experience in the games. There are a few obvious associations you can make with red in Squid Game, the most notable of which being the pink soldiers. I personally like to think of them as magenta, but I guess that's what they were going for, I don't know. They are ever present in the show and they loom over the contestants. Faceless and imposing. The art director's commentary on the pink soldiers is really interesting. She said she wanted to make them all look like worker ants while also incorporating practicality into their costumes. The worker ant sentiment and the hierarchy of their system is further highlighted by their masks, tying them all into the circle, triangle, square theme of the whole show, where the circle guards are workers, triangle guards are enforcers, and square guards are managers. It's really cool that the viewer can understand this hierarchy by just paying attention a little closely, despite the fact that it's never formally communicated in the whole show. At least I don't think it is. The guards' bodysuits being magenta leans into the tonal dissonance of the show. They are soldiers, but their bright pink facade throws you off from the idea that they could be at all aggressive. Even a majority of the stairway sets are painted a pale pink, a much less aggressive shade than red. As far as color psychology goes, red is often associated with anxiety, adrenaline, intensity, and aggression. A lot of fast food chains also use red predominantly in their branding, as the color has been shown to increase hunger levels in people. Even high-ranking military uniforms are often a solid red. In sharp contrast, the pale pink used in the show could be identified as drunk tank pink. It's used to make areas like prisons and schools much calmer than they would otherwise be. Which, let's face it, they're pretty much the same thing anyways, right? So combining these two colors and schools of thought, we get the bright, eye-catching shade of magenta in the soldiers' uniforms. The guards themselves strike both fear and conformity, festering aggression and passivity, hunger and bloodlust in the players by just standing around. Speaking of blood, which is an incredible segue, there are also more blood red or orangey shades of red in the show, namely with blood itself. When there is gore in the show, it is either a bright crimson red or sort of gross, dark, and murky. This is important to note because this is one of the few times the color red isn't pinkish in the show, making it stand out even more when it does show up. And you know what else is predominantly red or orange in the show? It's the skybox of the most gut-wrenching episode in the entire season, the Marble Game, episode 6, where all of your favorite characters die. In this episode, it feels to me like red is a character in the show. It isn't pulling any punches anymore, giving it to you straight with its warmer shade. The game is arguably the most brutal of them all, but in a twistedly ironic fashion, the least gory of them all. The Marble Game emotionally tears the contestants apart under this deep and frightening simulated sunset. It evokes the same foreboding that the eclipse from Berserk does. No spoilers, of course, but that's probably one of the most gnarly events in the entire story. Whew, that was intense, huh? But anyways, now that we've got one gross and heavy part of the show out of the way, what do you say we cool off a little bit? See, it's funny because it's actually the name of the next section. Initially, this section was going to be all about the color blue, but grouping all the cool colors together made a lot of sense for a wide range of reasons. When you think of cool colors in Squid Game, or Squid Game in general, the players' outfits might be the first thing that come to mind. Aside from being drippy as heck and being inspired by 70s athletic wear, I wanted to point out their very specific color. They're a sort of teal green / blue mix, and I think they are this way for a reason. On a very basic level, it makes all the players look like a giant mass of green, like soldiers might in real life. Sort of like the games or the war they're going to and then they will all die facelessly or something like that. It could also be a literal allusion to the term blue-collar worker, again reinforcing their status. These color choices actually have an interesting linguistic significance. In 1969, two researchers named Brent Berlin and Paul Kay stated that in any language across the world, names for colors will be developed in a certain specific order, as pictured somewhere on screen right now. Pretty interesting stuff. And according to Andrew Kim's 1985 paper, Korean color terms, an aspect of semantic fields and related phenomena, alongside some online posts I found, some Korean expressions interchangeably use the words for green and blue. Why I say all this is because in Korean, the use of GRU terms, no, not that GRU, but like GRU as in green and blue mushed into one word, is prevalent in describing things that are brightly colored, lively, and fresh. The contestants' teal attire therefore underscores the idea that they're competing for survival, or staying alive specifically. Even the warehouse / sleeping quarters of the contestants are painted a similar color, further highlighting their struggle to live even in a supposedly safe resting space. With this, there is now a cultural justification for grouping these colors together, but maybe it would also help to look at them from a general color perspective. Separating the two also has its own merit. From understanding this GRU phenomenon, it might not be surprising to know that in Korean, blue can represent youthfulness, creativity, vivacity, and hope. This is kind of at odds with the Western understanding of the color blue, viewing it more as a melancholic and calm color. Deeper shades of blue have been known to represent pensiveness, sadness, and even death, when lighter ones can represent freedom and creativity. This might be a stretch, but with the players' uniforms being at the sort of midpoint between light and dark, it could be reinforcing the precarious nature of their lives. On the other hand, there's green. Green actually has a lot of different meanings in different contexts. Leaning into the idea of representing freshness and life, green is often associated with nature, peace, and healing. Sometimes it can even represent good luck, wealth, and prosperity. But it can have a lot of alternative connotations, like associations with militaristic conformity, envy, and in a Kubrickian context, death too. At this point, like every color can just represent death, it seems like, but I think it's valid to bring up anyways. Having elements of both green and blue in their outfits, the players are visually at odds with everyone else in the Squid Games. Looking at a color wheel, red and green are directly contrasting colors, and so are blue and gold, or orange. This parallels the direct conflict between the players and the soldiers, and the indirect one with the players and the VIPs. They are forcefully made to participate on one hand, while contesting an unseen higher power on the other. They are literally and metaphorically stuck between a rock and a hard place. A lot of the lighting in the show is very fluorescent blue or cyan. The warehouse and the guards' quarters are both very bluely lit, creating a sort of sickly and depressing atmosphere. Sorta like going to after-school Hagwon, am I right, my fellow Asians? This enhances the idea that the guards honestly don't have it much better than the players, as they're constantly surveilled and put in what are essentially neat little prison cells. Arguably the most desperate guard scenes are also the most grimy and green, those being the organ harvesting scenes. The green vibes here just show the insane lengths that guards will go to, even cooperating with players in order to make a little more money off the games. And to top it all off, there's one specific scene which I think encapsulates the meanings of green and blue in Squid Game really accurately, and that is in the standoff between the frontman and the policeman. The frontman stands with the guards in the trees, while Junho, facing an open ocean and sea, stands against a cliff which is very blue. The green, lively trees represent a chance for life if the policeman accepts the frontman's offer, and the deep, murky blue of the ocean represents death, obviously, for Junho. But still, both green and blue in this scene are used to underscore the idea of desperate survival and life being at stake. As we dig deeper into these cool colors, I just wanted to quickly talk about purple, because it only predominantly shows up in one very important sequence of the show, that being the glass bridge game, where the VIPs are all watching the players tumble to their deaths, live! If the color purple has ever been a part of a literary discussion, you'll almost certainly hear someone say that it's a, say it with me now, royal color. Very good, very good. Which obviously makes sense. Why wouldn't you associate the wealthy global shadow elites with the color purple at that point? They're the closest it gets to true royalty these days, unless we're talking about people like the Queen, where, let's face it, I don't know how hot she's doing at the moment. For my own sake, I will choose not to elaborate further. But besides representing royalty, purple can also be used to create a similar deep, foreboding, and intense atmosphere as a darker blue could. It can also represent romance, seduction, and debauchery, which does sort of happen in the show. The lighting for the glass bridge game as a whole is really dissimilar to the rest of the show. It feels like an actual carnival, and uses colors from a very unfamiliar palette to all the other games. This was again done intentionally, of course, to make the players all seem like circus animals performing a high wire act. This puts the viewer in the same mental position as the players, with both of them being completely out of their element with what to expect visually. If you really think about it too, there's no game to be played here, it's just a toss-up. A straight 50-50 chance for about a dozen glass panels. It is the most unfair game in the entire show. Also, I feel the need to point out that there are live people around just being used as props, and they're all like essentially naked in the show, which is wild, right? I felt like I was losing my mind when I first saw them and just not be acknowledged. But I guess it just adds to the whole like debauchery thing. Anyways, I've talked around the VIPs far too much already, so let's finally discuss them directly, shall we? Let's unmask these sickos. Rich people, The Simpsons, the Minions, jaundice. What do these four things have in common? You guessed it, strong associations with the color yellow. Or gold, I guess. Or there might even be an overlap, because maybe everyone in the Simpsons universe has jaundice, except for the people of color. But let's not dig into specifics. Yellow can traditionally represent wealth, sanctity, and prestige in Korea, with it often being associated with Korean royalty. It being at the center of the Obangseg color arrangement is also significant, adding to the idea that it's at the center of everything in relation to all the other colors. All this is really evidently presented through the VIPs. They are all of very high status and put on the games for themselves, being at the center of the operation. They put the games on for their own amusement, in an effort to try and beat the boredom that comes with the sheer magnitude of their wealth and power. It's sort of like they have access to Minecraft creative mode in real life. It's not as much fun when you can fill your inventory with diamond blocks whenever you please. Minecraft analogies are the only way I can process the world, apparently. The VIP's designs are very Kubrickian, in that they heavily resemble the masked elites from Eyes Wide Shut. The film is notorious for its exploration of extreme debauchery, most notably in the scene with the giant sex cult orgy that Tom Cruise stumbles upon. These themes are very clearly carried into the designs of the VIPs as well. Obviously, the big gold masks are a clear parallel between the two, but there also seeming to be a similar color-coded hierarchy in both worlds. Both these pieces of media are also going back and referencing the Rothschild Surrealist Ball, which was a similar celebration of wealth and status which took place in 1972. It featured a lot of rich and famous people from around the world at the time coming to the party in these elaborate headdresses, as was specified in the invite. So to sort of encapsulate that idea, this reference is being made in both Squid Game and Eyes Wide Shut. I personally don't have a huge issue with the VIP's acting, but a lot of people have vocally found it really stiff and odd at certain parts. I honestly think it was alright for them to be cartoonish and off-putting, because that in a way represents how the world at large views Westerners. Cartoonishly evil, sleazy, off-putting, and obnoxious. The VIP's actors themselves were all pretty established performers. It's just that they had a hard time communicating a good performance with the language barrier and unflattering editing. Regarding costumes, I was really intrigued by the meanings behind each of the VIP's unique masks. My research yielded convoluted results, but stick with me, I think there's something cool here. The host, or player 1, or O Ilnam, has an ornate spiky owl mask. Traditionally, owls represent wisdom and knowledge, and in a biblical sense, they symbolize grief, solitude, and destruction. These all very fittingly describe player 1's quest to quench his ennui with what is essentially murderous musical chairs. VIP 3 has a deer mask, with deer often being associated with religious piety and divinity. Could this be a religious leader then? No, religious leaders don't do bad things, right? Ha 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 ha. VIP number 2 has a bull mask, with bulls having close associations with the stock market. This could lead us to believe that he's some Wall Street type big businessman, people who do hold a lot of socio-political power in real life. VIP number 4, who gets the most isolated attention in the show, is wearing either a tiger or a leopard mask. If it is a tiger mask, it could be referencing Korea's national animal, the Siberian tiger. This could lead us to believe that he's a prominent politician involved in the nation. And VIP number 6's eagle mask could represent American imperialism, as the bald eagle is America's national bird. Korea and the world at large have been heavily and often forcefully influenced by American culture, standards, and preconceptions. A prominent example of this would be the Korean War in the 1950s. But here's where it gets a little hazy. Of the remaining masks, the lion, the bear, and the leopard, there is a lot of overlapping symbolism between them. They could all represent strength, fortitude, and/or high status in a variety of ways. Which is fine. I mean, the remaining 3 VIPs could be military officials, politicians, or royalty from across the world. This was all until one fateful online search led me to some information from none other than the Bible. With the show already having an undercurrent of religious themes, especially with Christianity, there is a treasure trove of details one could analyze in the show regarding religion, but I won't be doing all of that. I will just a little bit though, and hope this was at least somewhat intentional by the art director. If not, I will just be completely speculating for the next couple of minutes, which I guess is the point of theology anyways. Hey, this might actually work. Just to preface, I'm not a Christian myself, nor am I super well versed with theology, so I tried to compensate with online research to the best of my ability. From what I found, in the Old Testament book of Daniel, Daniel, a noble under King Nebuchadnezzar, interprets various visions from God, all symbolically pertaining to the apocalypse or end times. This is also often referred to as the eschaton. In chapter 2 of the book of Daniel, he describes seeing a large statue with a gold head, a silver chest and arms, a bronze stomach and thighs, iron legs, and feet of iron and clay. These four major parts represent kingdoms from all across history, ranging from Babylon to Egypt. More significantly, this distinction of four separate kingdoms reemerges in chapter 7, where Daniel receives another vision. This is the good part. He describes seeing four beasts emerge out of the ocean: a lion with eagle's wings, a bear with ribs between its teeth, a four-headed leopard with wings of a fowl, and a fourth terrifying beast, different from the others, with 10 horns and giant metal teeth. Notably, there are 7 heads between all the beasts, corresponding exactly with the 7 total VIPs, reinforcing the idea that the VIPs are all nobles from across the world. I immediately thought these beasts corresponded pretty shockingly well with the remaining VIPs, those being the lion, bear, and leopard. One could maybe interpret the wings that some of the beasts have to be represented by the masks of the owl and the eagle, and the fourth beast with the horns could represent the deer or the bull. In general, though, the significance of the fourth beast and the statue, which is eventually struck down by God, indicate God's kingdom's triumph over all other earthly forces. This could mean a lot of different things. One, it could maybe allude to Giyun in season 2 trying to take down the VIPs after he's won the games. Or maybe it's hinting at an arc where the organization is slowly taken down over following seasons. Or maybe generally player 1's death and the fact that he could no longer host the games. However, perhaps it's a more existential allusion, sort of like in the poem Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. This biblical link may be symbolizing their gross wealth as an earthly indulgence, one which will eventually be wiped away by death and time. The games are an act of senseless violence, acting as a tribute to their gross wealth, but their true legacy should lie in their deeds. In a faithful lens, the eyes of God will rightly punish them in heaven, as the end times destroy everything they could possibly create. Or, in a more grim lens, maybe they lived to the greatest extent they could, indulging in the vilest sins possible for their own selfish earthly pleasures. Maybe, they thought, there is nothing after this. It just depends who gets the last word in this eschatological conversation. A quivering humankind or a silent god. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Another slam dunk for the Arjeshh research team. Google searching leopard symbolism Bible took me way farther than I could have ever expected. Back to yellow. I've found that there are a lot of contrasting cultural meanings for the color yellow, but I think they all come together cohesively to tell the story of Squid Game. To ease in from the previous section, yellow has often been associated with Judas, someone who famously betrayed his bestie, and maybe your bestie as well, Jesus Christ. Resulting from that, yellow can take on a tone of spinelessness, deception, and animosity. But it's also an extremely eye-catching and alerting color, accentuating the unabashed yet private cruelty of the VIPs. But yellow can also represent life, energy, happiness, and warmth. My friend Michelle, shout out Michelle, follow her here, who I talked to about Squid Game a little bit, told me that a lot of Korean students' uniforms are yellow. So tying all of these meanings back to player 1, they highlight every aspect of his character pretty clearly. He's a sick old man, too rich for his own good, hiding in plain sight to relive a twisted, nostalgic fantasy. I really liked this shot towards the end of the show, where the frame is again split in half based on color. Il-nam, on his literal deathbed, is illuminated by yellow, still believing he holds the power in the conversation. Giyun, in contrast, stands tall above him, entrenched in dark blues. It's a lucky moment where he finally rose out of his blue-collar background and had a chance to be an elite like Il-nam. Instead, Giyun challenges Il-nam's pessimistic and warped worldview that people don't really care about the needy. In the end, Ilnam did die somewhat happy after competing in the games, but was proven wrong in his perspective on disenfranchised people. His explanation for the games is also so cruelly simple, it's frustrating for Gyun, so I suppose neither of them got exactly what they wanted. Their circumstances were not so black and white. This thing keeps falling off. Just pretend this is here. I can't. It's not sticking to me that well. I have one more costume change in me though, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, let's get on with the actual analysis, right? Finally, on to our last color section is the black and white section. These colors are used quite frequently to represent authority, morality, order, and character in the show. Black tends to represent dignity, decorum, and even fashionability. It's associated with authoritative characters like the frontman or the VIPs, and obviously it represents death and evilness as it tends to. If it were to be represented by one object, I think the gift box coffins would be perfect. They represent decorum and neutrality, carrying away the corpse of an unlucky participant to an equally dark incinerator room. And again, the little pink ribbon on top is hilariously distasteful, colorfully reminding them of the sheer violence of the games. Overall, black provides a platform on which to gauge the higher-ups' morality. It is the starting point from which the leaders of the games depart to, going to their true colors. The frontman monologues in episode 5 about how cheating at the games ruined the equal opportunity everyone had to reach the final cash prize. However, this moral compass is extremely questionable because unfair advantages and just straight-up cheating run rampant in Squid Game. Moreover, this just seems to be a view that the frontman himself holds, as Ilnam and the other VIPs put on the games for their own amusement. All this is represented by the frontman's very reflective costume. It is regularly engulfed in gold light, showing that no matter how much he justifies his actions, he'll never truly be that much better than the VIPs. At his weakest points, his costume reflects blue, showing that he too becomes as powerless as the players, a feeling that he is intimately familiar with. The frontman overall is such an interesting character because we're told so little about him. He has so many conflicting relationships and motives, especially with his brother, that I would love to see unraveled in season 2. But overall, his costume represents the corruption of justice. The series shows us how flawed his ideology is through the countless player deaths that take place that happen not because of random chance. In contrast, the color white represents purity, innocence, and goodness. It is also used to simulate a sort of ethereal purgatory in the show, also being able to represent death. White had often been associated with mourning in Korean tradition, therefore also reinforcing these death vibes. The plain white room set is also really cool and visually interesting. They're usually taken to this place as a prerequisite for the following game, needing them to form teams or pick numbers or something like that. It could have been made this way because whoever is designing these sets in the world of Squid Game thought maybe white is the most neutral and least influential color on an individual, hence allowing impartial and rational decisions to take place amongst all the players. However, this makes the room so imposing, ethereal, and scary that this just isn't possible. It feels otherworldly, like you've already died and are waiting for your judgment in the next game. And again, this is a reference to Kubrick's Space Odyssey, compounding on the deathy vibes. Those are the extremes that black and white are taken to, but in large part they do still represent formality, neutrality, and order. The childhood flashbacks, for one, are in black and white. This may not just be for nostalgia purposes, as it could also represent that the world is fair, morally unquestionable, and innocent in this time period. And clothing is one place where these ideas really shine through, with the final 3 contestants donning their congratulatory tuxedos, as I have right now. Their alliances are unpredictable, and their moral judgments are questionable, having to stand on so many bodies to get to this point. The balance of life and death present in these final episodes, whether the players will kill or be killed, is underscored perfectly with these outfits. It's also a tongue-in-cheek way for the game runners to initiate the players into Squid Game, implying they're just like them in getting to this point. They may still be dehumanized with the numbers, but they could be on track to becoming an elite within within the Squid Game system, as the frontman has become. The final game is a culmination of all these ideas, and all the color meanings explored up till now. Gi-yoon and Sang-woo are at their most animalistic and desperate moments, entrenched in deep blue lighting under heavy rain. Sang-woo's pristine white shirt gets covered in red over time too, representing his vicious aggressiveness. To talk about Sang-woo for a bit separately, it's interesting to see the way his outfit transforms over the course of the show. When he's not in his participant tracksuit, he's always wearing a suit and a formal shirt. It mirrors his very prideful personality, having been of a high socioeconomic status at one point. He only takes off his jacket at his lowest points in the entire show, once briefly before he is about to take his own life, and of course during the final episode. It's a loss of all the pride and societal wealth he had going for him, reducing him to his most primal state. And the final battle itself is really vicious, but also confusing in a lot of ways. You could perceive it as both the remaining contestants getting their karmic justice. Gi-yoon has a bad gambling problem, but he was unfairly laid off and traumatized by his previous job, wanted to be a better father, and helped everyone he possibly could in the games. Whereas Sang-woo offered up his own mother's store as an asset for a failed investment, unable to own up to his own mistakes. He stepped over everyone he needed to in an effort to rectify this. In the end, you could say Gi-yoon and Sang-woo got what they deserved as moral characters, but that may be too black and white a judgment. That's the name of the section. So many good people had to die to get to this point, that both their ideologies may be valid in some way. Can you be a good person in a system which demands you survive by any means necessary? I don't know. The design of the Squid Game is a complete antithesis to the design of the previous game. With all of its glitz and extravagant glamour, it's just a dirt pit with painted lines on the ground. Rain is pouring and obscuring the already sort of uncomfortable view of the VIPs, and it's a set reused from the first game. Of all of the real-life remakes of Squid Game, this is also the most neglected game, since it is so entrenched in a Korean childhood, and because the rules are a little complex, it's usually left out of these recreations. It's replaced with things like musical chairs, a prisoner's dilemma, a race, or something else. It's never actually the eponymous Squid Game. Since it clearly on a meta level has such little appeal to an international audience, it's clearly not about impressing the VIPs anymore. It's really just a personal tribute to Il-nam's childhood again. Come rain or shine, he must have been out there playing Squid Game in his own childhood, roughhousing with his friends until some of them won. It's a bitter tribute to the end of his life, him putting on his favorite games for the VIPs in its rawest, most brutal form. It was supposed to be his swan song finale as his cancer slowly debilitated him, but he couldn't bear to witness it out of his own chronic FOMO after playing in the games himself. Hence, the only people to truly grasp the tone of the final games are Gi-yoon, Sang-woo, and maybe the frontman. And with Sang-woo dead, Gi-yoon is one of the very few people in the whole world who carry this haunting memory with them, of their childhood turned inside out. A systematic perversion of reason, good and evil, fairness and justice, all because he couldn't pay his debts. Every truth, every shade of black and white had melded together now into a bleak gray. This time the fit is a blazer with the red hat, you know, since I can't dye my hair red like Gi-yoon at the end of Squid Game. Without the hat, I feel like it could be a decent, like, Stewie from Succession cosplay. So shout out to the stew heads that are watching this. Squid Game has an incredibly dense and articulate visual language. It's frequently used to set the tone of certain scenes or convey future story elements subconsciously, and with its simplistic yet unique stylistic flair, it's unquestionably one of the most visually remarkable shows of the last few years. However, this visual clarity may have turned out to be something of a double-edged sword. At this point, we as a society have seen Squid Game devolve into a shell of itself. It's transcended from its original intention as a stylized thriller come critique on capitalism to just images and costumes and concepts. There have been so many memes of the show, even persisting to this very day, like 4 or 5 months later. The gamified part of the show has seemed to stick with most media, especially Western media, which in a way turned it into a parody of itself. People like Jimmy Fallon watched the show, and rather than embrace its anti-capitalist commentary, he thought, What if this was more like Heads Up by Ellen? And speaking of apps, Squid Game iconography is incessantly replicated on free game sites. There's knockoff Among Us mobile game ads, hundreds of Roblox and Fortnite replicas, and even standalone recreations. So you too can participate in the Squid Game! No shade to any of this, by the way, I'm sure they're fun. I haven't personally played any of these, but I definitely would. But regardless, I think there is some merit to looking at all of these replicas. Aside from the lame ones where all the participants are just rich vloggers. There's no fun in those versions because they're not even really competing for money. They're just playing children's games in silly outfits. Like they reinvented school field day for content. I've watched a pretty decent handful of Squid Game videos by now, since I'm extremely late to the party with my own video. I think the better recreations of Squid Game, or at least the more genuine seeming ones, also double as really interesting social experiments. Moist Critical and Anthpo's recreations of Squid Game I think pose really interesting questions about human psychology, especially about how much strain an individual is willing to take in order to get some money. Though there's different amounts, different games, and different demographics, it's interesting to see the ways in which they match up and differ from the show. Mr. Beast's Squid Game is the most popular of all these recreations, and one of the most popular YouTube videos overall in the past couple years. A good handful of content creators I admire have talked about this video at length, and the sort of weird ethical and socio-political message that it might send to people. Like, it is a little jarring conceptually to have a show about the horrors that impoverished people go through be deconstructed and have a brand logo plastered on the largest object in any of the given rooms in the video. But yeah, I mean, check out those videos too if you're interested. I enjoyed them a lot and the link is in the description. I personally have some petty gripes with the video that I will be airing out here. I personally was expecting a little more pomp and circumstance with its presentation. Instead, it just looks like a regular vlog which happens to have a $3 million price tag. Like, why bother building these enormous and expensive sets if the end product is gonna have like weirdly overexposed and color graded footage, you know? It seems like a waste in terms of the way things were focused. But I'm not really blaming this on anyone because there have been some pretty serious claims made against Mr. Beast, despite his enormous charity efforts. And so again, I'm not pinning this on anyone on the actual production team, rather I'm calling into question this really intense and destructive work ethic. I don't know Mr. Beast personally, nor do I know any of the content creators I brought up earlier, and that includes Jimmy Fallon. I know that laugh is hiding something. Anyways, I only know the image that they present to the public. Their best feat, if you will, that they put forward. But an outlet like the New York Times is commenting on Mr. Beast being cruel to his employees for the sake of content creation and also for promoting pump and dump crypto schemes. And so on like a meta level, this reflects the message of Squid Game again. People may find themselves in positions of enormous wealth and power, be it from hard work or just getting lucky. But is it the strength of your character that shines through ultimately? Or should you sacrifice everything to make as much profit as possible? That very same New York Times article does talk about Mr. Beast's business ventures more than these allegations after all. Squid Game is a landmark piece of media. Its purpose wasn't to reinvent the wheel or say something that hasn't already been said. The point was to say it again, with bold stylistic flair. Economically and socially, things are not spectacular at the moment. All over the world, and of course in South Korea, workers and poor people are treated with vicious neglect. The car manufacturer in Squid Game that laid off Gi-hun actually directly mirrors the 2009 layoffs from Ssangyong Motors. There was similar police brutality waged on workers campaigning for their own job security, and both Squid Game and Parasite depict life living in banjihas, or basement apartments, as a reality for people of lower economic classes. I suppose the place Squid Game takes in society is as a huge jolt to our collective systems, to validate on a massive platform the discontent that people all over the world are feeling due to severe wealth inequality. Despite it being contorted in various ways to dilute its meaning, its message largely came across loud and clear. There was a huge protest in October of 2021 in South Korea, where a vast number of people were wearing Squid Game masks and outfits. They were campaigning for better contracts, work laws, protections, and benefits so that they don't have to run the same rat race as the game's contestants. At its core, Squid Game is about real people in a surreal circumstance. Seeing the tragic life stories of so many people distilled on screen allows us to better empathize and emphasizes the severity of economic inequality. I, quite frankly, personally worry for my own future. I'm fine right now, of course, and I do recognize that I got extremely lucky with my life circumstances. And I'm not even opposed to doing work. That's not the point. The point is, what do we do in a world that wants to work us to the bone for pennies? Why do people like you or my parents suddenly not deserve a pension anymore? How long must we run the race for? How long do we play the game? But I think that is starting to change, and is certainly supported by the idea Squid Game is propagating. There had been a record number of voluntary resignations in 2021 in response to worsening work conditions around the world, and protests carry on to try and make the world a fairer place for everyone. So amidst the horrible stuff that keeps happening all the time, there is something good happening at the same time. I miss you, John Krasinski. There are tons of people out there like Gi-hoon who wouldn't turn their backs to injustice. We just have to keep a lookout for the red hair. Jokes aside though, I really appreciate how Gi-hoon is portrayed as an earnest hero despite his bad decisions in the real world. It might sound cheesy, but it's really nice to have a character like that anchor the show, to say that there's never any harm in trying to help others. In the bleakest of moments, we won't have a giant translucent piggy bank in the sky to look to while people are falling to the wayside. The only things we do have are empathy and hope. And with those, we can keep on licking, kicking, and crying out to try and make the world a better place. Thank you so much for watching, and especially if you've made it to the end. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to check this video out. It's been a crazy labor of love, and I've never made anything this big before, so if you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and consider subscribing. I mean, you sat through the whole video anyway. You might as well. I will be making more video essays and stuff like this in the future, alongside covers coming soon and my own music coming soon too, so stick around for a great ride coming. This video's taken so long to make that it feels sort of surreal even while filming it that I'm done filming. Now I'm gonna go edit everything. But yeah, I sincerely hope you really enjoyed it, because I really enjoyed researching the world of Squid Game and putting this all together. So anyways, this has been me, Arjeshh. I hope you enjoyed your stay. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.